We're divided, polarized, and breaking up into political tribes. And yet every day people are exercising patriotism around the country. Just this morning, hundreds of DC area students marched out of school to march against gun violence on the Capitol. Today, 3 steps you can take to exercise patriotism in these bad times. Hi, I'm Rich Harwood. It's another edition of Harwood Half Hour, live from our studios in Bethesda. Glad you could be with us. Shoot me a message and let me know that you can hear me, and tell me where you're calling in from today. And here's the question for today. How patriotic are you feeling in these times? How patriotic are you feeling in these times? You know, I've been thinking a lot about patriotism lately, about what it means, where we are with it, how we're feeling about it these days, given everything that's going on in the country, what patriotism even calls us to do in these times. You know, in my lifetime, when I think about patriotism, I think first and foremost about 9/11. I remember the very day that the World Trade Centers were attacked in New York City. I was in my study at home working on a new article. And after the attacks, there was this incredible rise of patriotism around the country. You may remember it if you remember 9/11 or if you were around for it. At the time, all of a sudden there were flag decals that people were putting on their cars. There were patriotic hymns that we were all singing at ball games. People were hanging flags from their homes. I remember that President Bush, George W. Bush, gave a speech and said, to be patriotic is to go shopping at the mall. I'll never forget that speech, and I'll never forget the sense of patriotism then. But it was fleeting. I remember doing a study at the time of how Americans were feeling about the country, and they said that our patriotism after 9/11 was fleeting. It was a sense of a false start, that something rich and meaningful and purposeful was going to happen in the country. And then more recently today, patriotism is often used as a weapon. You know, just a week or so ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, President Trump gave a speech in which he said literally that all Democrats hate America. He was questioning the fundamental patriotism of Democratic members of Congress. And then, not just days after President Trump gave that speech, I believe there was a Democratic Congresswoman who accused Democratic and other members of Congress of holding dual allegiance between the United States and a foreign nation. Many people suggesting that she too was questioning the patriotism of her fellow congressional members. And in this way, patriotism is used as a weapon to diminish, to demean, to question the motivations, the very personal motivations of others in terms of their commitment to our country. I believe that we're increasingly summoned to exercise our patriotism in our country to face the challenges that are before us, the many challenges that are before us. And, you know, as I travel around the country, there are a number of challenges that I keep hearing about, and I suspect you hear about every day as well in your own work, in your own lives, maybe as you travel this country as well. I think there's the original sin of slavery, that we have to come to terms increasingly in our country with our past and what it means to move together into our future. And I think in order to deal with the original sin of slavery, to deal with the systemic racism that still exists, which I spoke about recently in a Facebook Live, in a Harwood Half Hour, in order to face the original sin of slavery and the systemic racism that we face today, will require our undivided attention, will require us coming together in a way that demands that we exercise a sense of patriotism to the country. I believe that there are political leaders, as I just mentioned, who are using hot rhetoric to question one another's allegiance to this country, as opposed to facing up to the tough issues that we confront as a nation and as a people that require our attention, that require our commitment, that require our effort to make progress in our country. I wonder, as I travel around the country, about public schools where kids are going to inadequate public schools over and over and over again. And I wonder, as we see this happening, are these kids' futures doomed? Are they subjected? Are they really destined for a doomed future? And whether or not we can change the path of our schools so that these kids get a fair and decent shot at the American dream and can fulfill their God-given potential. And I think it's going to require a sense of patriotism for us to come together and act on that issue as well. And then as I travel around the country and listen to the news and hear people speak, so many of us, so many groups, so many of us Americans have grievances about our economic plight and our economic future, grievances about whether or not we can afford to send our kids, our children, to a community college or a technical college or a four-year college. Grievances about local plants like the Chevrolet plant that just announced its closure in Lordstown, which is right outside of Youngstown, Ohio, in Northeast Ohio. And people wondering, I remember seeing an interview of a woman in Lordstown who was saying, you know, what's the future of my community? And essentially what you're saying to me and my family is that we have to pick ourselves up and go find a job in some distant community. And what about my support system here in this community? How am I going to make my way forward? How will my family make its way forward? Where will we get the support, the friendship, the companionship that we need? And what will happen to our community and its future? And so I happen to believe, and this may sound corny or out of date or something, but I happen to believe that we need patriots in our country. We need patriots who are willing to face up to these challenges, who are willing to come together with others, who are willing to create solutions to the challenges that we face, and who are willing to take action together so that we can create a brighter future for ourselves and our children and our families and our future generations, that we can ensure that the American dream still exists for everyone in our country, not just some of us, that we can ensure that every individual has a sense of dignity in our society and can fulfill their God-given potential. So what I'd like to do in the next few minutes is talk about 3 steps for how you can exercise a new patriotism in these bad times. 3 steps that you can take that I want to urge you to think about today, that I want to urge you to consider today, and that ultimately, what really counts is that I want to urge you to take action on as you move forward. So 3 steps. The first is this. Number 1, keep focused on the true meaning of patriotism and don't get waylaid. Don't get waylaid by others. Don't get waylaid by all the negative talk, by all the negativity, by all the divisiveness, by all the nastiness, even by some of the hate that we hear in our society. Get focused on the true meaning of patriotism. And here's what I mean by that. When you actually look at the meaning of patriotism, it means this: love of country, devotion to country. That's what it means. And when I think about love of country and devotion of country, it says to me, when we love something, when we're really devoted to something, when we really care about something, that we stick with it over time, and that, in fact, we stick with it even when, or especially when we don't like what it's becoming, when we don't like, or especially like when we don't like the direction in which it's moving. And so for me, the true meaning of patriotism is that we have such love of country, such devotion to country, that especially in these times, in these bad times, when we're so divided, when we're so polarized, when we're breaking up into political tribes, that to be a true patriot means that we stick with the country that we love, that we're devoted to, and we fight for it. So my question for you in this first point is, are you willing to fight for a better country? Are you willing to fight for a better country? Are you willing to seek a more perfect union? Are you willing to seek a more perfect union? And to me, that's the true meaning of patriotism today, the new meaning of patriotism. Second, if the first one is keep with the true meaning of patriotism, the second one is we need to work together. We need to work together. which means don't give up on one another. We can't give up on each other. We can't give up on each other. And, you know, the interesting thing about the word patriotism, patriot, when you look it up and when you study it, is that it has a derivative word. It has a derivative meaning. And the derivative meaning is compatriot, which means with fellow country people, with fellow country people. And so it's interesting, the meaning of patriot and the meaning of compatriot means that you can't exercise patriotism alone, that it's exercised with other people, with other Americans, that we're in this together. That's not just a sentiment. It's actually the meaning of patriotism, which is at the root of the founding of our country and the belief that we can make a more perfect union and that our country is worth fighting for. And so what I would say is that we need to work together with our compatriots in order to create the kind of country that we can be proud of, the kind of country that reflects the best in us, the best of us. And it seems to me that's what we want, isn't it? Don't we want a country that reflects the better parts of us, not the worst parts of us, that reflects the best of our values, not the worst of our values? And it seems to me that in these bad times, we are called, we are summoned to exercise a new patriotism that says that we will work with others. We will work others to create a better country. And so I ask you to do that. What it means is that we have to square up and realize and recognize and embrace that we're not going to always get our way, that we're going to have to compromise, that we're going to have to bridge divides to work with others, that we're going to have to work with some other folks that we may not like, but who are allies in some kind of issue that we want to face, or that in some cases there are allies on some issues and they may be opponents on other issues, the very same people. But if we actually believe that patriotism is worth something, if we actually want to exercise our love and devotion for our country, if we actually believe that we need to do that with others, then it seems to me we don't have the luxury of always working with people who agree with us on everything, that we don't have the luxury of always having to like everyone that we work with, that sometimes having an ally means that we want to move in the same direction, even if we don't especially like each other as people. If you really care about those kids in those schools, in adequate public schools, who really deserve a fair shot at the American dream, then we're going to have to work with others. If you really believe that we need to face up to the original sin of slavery in our country and systemic racism that still exists, then we're going to have to exercise our patriotism and work with others. If you believe that we need to address the grievances that people have about their economic futures or plant closings, or the fact that they can't send their kids to a local community college the next semester, then we're going to have to exercise our patriotism and find ways to work with our compatriots, our fellow country people, to make a difference. Which leads me to my third point. So remember, if the first point is we need to keep focused on the true meaning of patriotism, and the second point is that we're going to need to work with our compatriots, with others, the third point for you is this: each of us, me, you, folks you know down the hall from where you're watching this, or in your home, or the people you'll see at work tomorrow or at school tomorrow, that each of us is going to need to show up differently. That how we show up in life, how we show up in public life in particular, matters, and matters in particular when it comes to patriotism. And so here again, there are two things I just want to mention about how we show up. It seems to me that if we're going to exercise a sense of patriotism, love of country, devotion of country, if we're going to exercise that with others, with our compatriots, then it seems to me that we have to exercise a sense of courage, a sense of courage. And here's what I mean. We need to be willing, not just accepting, but willing and able to stand and sit with others in a space where we hear each other's concerns, where we're willing to understand each other's lived experiences, where we are willing to sit and stand with the pain and the anger and sometimes the sorrow and even the rage that people feel about what's happening in their lives and happening in this country. That we need to have the courage to be willing to try to create together a future together against the odds that we face, against or notwithstanding the nastiness and division and polarization that runs throughout our society today. We need to be willing to have the courage to put a stake in the ground and to say not simply, this is what I stand against. That's easy. Any one of us can always talk about what we're against, why we don't like something, why we don't like the other person. That's easy. Particularly nowadays, that's easy. What's much more difficult, what really requires a sense of courage, is to put a stake in the ground and say, this is what I'm for. This is what I'm willing to stand for. This is what I'm willing to fight for. This is what I'm really devoted to. I love this country so much that I'm willing to put a stake in the ground and to declare with others what I stand for, what I believe in, what I'm willing to fight for, what I'm willing to work with others to create. That requires courage. That requires courage. And so I think in order to show up differently, it's going to require us to exercise courage. Now, here's the other thing I've learned when it comes to courage. Courage on its own never gets you far enough. And in fact, courage on its own can often lead to hubris and arrogance, sort of breastbeating, sort of saying, you know, I know all the answers by myself, and I'm just going to plow ahead and do what I need to do. So the flip side of courage, the other side of the coin, the same coin, is humility. Is humility. And so I think if we want to exercise patriotism along with our compatriots, it not only requires courage, it requires a sense of humility, a willingness to listen with an open heart. Think about it. The humility to listen with an open heart. The humility to have compassion for one another and to show that compassion. The humility to have empathy, to be willing to hear others' pain, to be willing to listen to it, to be willing to acknowledge it, to witness it for others. Requires a humility. The reason why is because we are taking ourselves out of the center of everything. Everything's not about us, me, myself, and I. It becomes about our compatriots, the others that we live with, the others in our communities that we need to understand, create things with, and take action with. Humility means that we have to be willing to listen to different points of view, that different points of view exist, that not just our point of view exists. Humility, I think, means that if we want to put a stake in the ground about what we're for, that we need to recognize that we don't have all the answers ourselves, that maybe we need to listen to one another in order to know where to put that stake in the ground. You know, there's an old saying I like that says, I don't know where I stand until I hear someone else speak. And so that requires a sense of humility. Humility is required to be a patriot because ultimately that stake in the ground about what we stand for, well, we're going to have to pick it up and move it at some point because the conditions around us have changed, which requires a different response, or because we simply made a wrong choice. And we need to acknowledge that we made a wrong choice, that we made a wrong decision, and that we need to pick up that stake in front of other people, with other people. And we need to acknowledge that we made a mistake and we need to put that stake in a different place. And so I believe today, maybe more than at any other time in my lifetime, we are summoned to exercise a new patriotism in bad times. And to do that, we're going to need to get focused on the real meaning of patriotism, the true meaning of patriotism, which is love of country, to devotion to country, even when, or especially when we don't like how things are going down. It means that we're going to have to work with others because to be a patriot means to have compatriots. And it means that we're going to have to show up differently. We're going to have to exercise a sense of courage, and we're going to have to exercise a sense of humility. Now, I know you can't take on the world. I know that none of us can solve all the problems that we face in this country alone. I know that none of us can take on systemic racism alone. I know that none of us can fix those public schools that kids are going to that require them to improve. None of us can do that alone. I know that none of us can change the rhetoric and hate speech of our politicians alone. I know that none of us can fix the grievances or meet the grievances that people have about their economic plight or plant closings or the fact that they can no longer send their kid to a community college or to a technical school. But here's what I do know also, that each of us has a sphere of influence in which we can take action, in which we can have an effect in our lives, in the lives of others, in the lives of our communities, in the lives of our society. And that each of us, in our own way, in our own small way oftentimes, is called to make a contribution to how we can improve our lives, our society, our country. And so I would ask you not, how can you take on all these challenges alone? That's too overwhelming. It's too big. They're too large for any of us to do that. I think the better question we ought to ask ourselves is this, and the question that I would ask you right now is, what's your contribution? What can you contribute to improving our society and making our lives better, ensuring that every American can live with dignity, that every American has a fair shot at the American dream, and that every American can fulfill their God-given potential? So here's my hope for you today. It's to deal with the challenges that we face in our country. And my hope for you today is for you to exercise a new patriotism where you can, so that you can be an example to others and that you can help lead the way. Because we need you. This country needs you in order to improve the direction that we're moving and to tap the better parts of ourselves and reflect our real values and reflect who we really are and who we really can become by working together. So I want to thank you for joining me for another episode of Harwood Half Hour. As you know, it's our 30th anniversary this year. We've taken this opportunity on our 30th anniversary to rededicate ourselves to finding ways to support people like yourself and you in your efforts in your own communities to improve our society and create a more hopeful, more inclusive society. Our work is rooted in a philosophy of civic faith and the practice of turning outward. We hope you'll go to our website so you can get resources that can help support what you're doing. We hope that you'll join us on future episodes of Harwood Half Hour 2 weeks from today on Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I look forward to seeing you. Thanks so much for joining me today. Be well.